Hello, everyone. I'm Lance Custen. I am the president and CEO of Realty.com. It's a pleasure to have you guys here today. I am joined by Kendall Bonner and Enzorn, and we are going to be talking about the NAR lawsuits and the settlements and everything going on. Um, I appreciate everybody who's here today. And the first thing I like to say is the sky is not falling. And I think that's one of the biggest things to start level setting as we go into this chat with everyone. And Kendall, I'm going to hand it off to you.
All right. Well, that was quick and easy. Well, I think that it's important to talk about what the lawsuits are actually, what this really means for us in terms of this NAR settlement, right? And I think there were three major impacts that this NAR settlement provided for us that I think actually are good things personally. And I can see the positive opportunities that we can take from this as an industry. And so I'm really excited to be on this call with both Lance and with you, Ed, to break that down. And, also, we want participation from you in the audience. Like if you have questions, write them in the comments. We can see them. We'll pop them up on the screen and do our best to answer as many questions as we can. Um, I just introduced myself. I'm Kendall Bonner. I'm in Tampa, Florida. I'm a team leader. I've been a Florida licensed attorney for 20 years, but I've been in real estate for the last 14. And it's just really an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you in the audience, as well as these two leaders that I'm on this call with. So, what I would say are the three major uh, impacts, rollouts, changes as a result of the settlement are, just briefly. And then I'd love for you, Ed, to comment on them and provide some color and some detail to these three concepts. The first one is, I think NAR did the best that they could to protect as many NAR members and NAR supported MLSs, boards, et cetera, brokerages. And, I value and appreciate that personally because, it's highly stressful if you're feeling like at any point you could be sued over this and you're just waiting for that shoe to drop and, sitting in the background, especially since we started to see lawsuits, copycat lawsuits, we're calling them, right? Naming individuals and teams as well as brokerages and board of realtors, MLSs, outside of just the big five, we'll call them. So, Ed, tell us a little bit about that. Like, what do you think went into NAR's mindset, what they were trying to do there, and how they could have done something different?
Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, my name is Ed Zorn. I'm the current vice president and general counsel for the California Regional Multiple Listing Service. We're the largest MLS in the country, and we got to be one of the defendants in one of these lawsuits. So we are in the copycat pile. My background is I've been an attorney for over 30 years. I've also been a realtor for over 20. I operated residential as well as commercial offices. And so kind of bring both the broker as well as the, MLS kind of perspective. And I still actually do deals on the side just here in my local town where I live. So still love real estate from that perspective. But my first 15 years of practice as an attorney was as a plaintiff's counsel, right? And I did construction defect litigation, which had lots of defendants. So I think you're right, Kendall. I think I'm almost certain NAR could have gotten out of this lawsuit very early for almost no money by simply agreeing to a rule change, right? That's exactly what I would have expected. But instead, what NAR did is they said, no, we're not leaving until we can cover as many brokerage firms, as many agents, as many MLSs as possible, right? And so I think the reality of the situation, though, is that they pushed all the way to a trial. That trial happened. And remember, guys, trials are not like they are on TV, right? Whoever has the best lawyer or pays the most money doesn't automatically win. That's not how it goes, right? Trials are based on the facts and the law. And the reality is when you put all the facts and the law into a courtroom with impartial jurors, the industry process of this offer of compensation through the MLS system lost. Okay. So NAR had to deal with the reality that our case lost. Now you move forward, Kendall, right, to the post jury motions that are coming up. And we were really looking at a situation where if NAR was going to probably lose on those motions, the judge was going to go forward to a judgment. And that judgment would probably be just under $5 billion. There was going to be a bond hearing. Now, NAR was not going to be facing having to cut a check for $5 million to appeal, but would they have to cut a check for 600, 700 million? Probably. They probably would not be able to do that. So they were probably looking at bankruptcy. And in fact, they even said that in some of their frequently asked questions, right? This is a contemplation they have. Realize what a bankruptcy for NAR does for all of us? Absolutely nothing, right? No coverage by anybody, no contribution of any money from NAR, no rule change influence, because that's the other thing that would have happened, right? And what we mean by that is the plaintiffs would have been able to bring an injunction in front of Judge Boo, who was the judge in that Sitzer case. And that single judge in Missouri would have gotten to rewrite the rules for all of us. I'm pretty sure that wouldn't have been a good outcome for us. So I think NAR really got squeezed where, hey, the time is now to get this deal done. I think they cut the best deal that they rationally could have gotten, and they pulled the trigger. And I think most people in the similar situation would have done the same thing.
Yeah, I think too, to bring up the fact that, once the DOJ started to insert itself into the conversation as well, especially in I think that was the Novak case or no select, right? Yeah, the one with MLS or MLS Penn, I think.
Yep.
It was, I think, insightful to see their commentary, because I think that also gave real direction to NAR on, hey, this is probably at a minimum what we need to do in order to appease all parties, because this isn't about just the plaintiffs here. This is also about the industry. This is also about, managing the conflicts or the drama or the trauma with the DOJ and perhaps FTC, so there was so much going on that they had to navigate, that I think that what they pulled off, I think, was, in my opinion, probably the best they could have done considering the situation that we were in. So I do appreciate that. Now, the second big thing, and actually I'm going to put these in reverse order. To me, the next big thing that they did that I think is actually fantastic is making buyer representation or buyer brokerage agreements required before you show a house. I think that's an added layer. I've seen it where they were just required, in the sense that, hey, before you went under contract or made an offer, you had to have one. This is, before you show, which to me makes a lot of sense, because, for example, when you're working with a seller, you don't list a home for sale without a listing agreement. So we really shouldn't be showing homes without being hired by a buyer, right? So, and without a buyer brokerage or buyer representation agreement. Talk to us about that piece and what you think about that, and how that implements or how that creates change in our business as well.
So I do think it's also an extremely positive event. CRMLS, California Regional MLS, actually voted at the board of directors level 3 years ago to ask that there be some kind of national level policy to mandate this. Where I practiced in California, almost nobody uses a buyer representation agreement. And so but every lawyer, every policy handbook you look at, all said, make sure you get a buyer representation agreement signed, right? But no one did it. Why? Because the competitor that I'm going up against doesn't do it. And so we created a situation where not doing it became the norm. So now with this new rule, those individuals who have always wanted to get buyer rep agreements signed don't have now the biggest burden and the biggest objection to that, which is no one else is doing it, because now everybody has to do it. I think it also directly addresses the criticisms of the current system that was being complained about, which was by sharing commissions between the listing broker and the buyer's broker, the consumers involved, specifically the buyers, who arguably were contributing to some of this payment, were not involved in setting that fee. And that's where all the arguments come that the fee was more than it needed to be, that type of an element. And so by now mandating that as an agent, you have to have this conversation you have to have this agreement about, hey, here are the services that I'm going to provide to you as a buyer's agent. Here's the 15 things that I'm going to agree to do for you to help you get the right home for your family. And in exchange for that, you're going to pay me this fee. All of that happening before you ever show a property puts the conversation and the decision making of how much should a buyer's agent make into the hands of the buyer who's paying the fee. And so I think that takes us, 85% of the way to solving the challenges and the dilemmas that the DOJs, the consumer advocate, the plaintiffs had been alleging in these type of cases. So I also think this is a good thing. I think there's wonderful opportunity here as well, in that buyer agency used to be considered like the path you have to kind of go through, the burden you have to carry until you can become a cool listing agent, right? That was kind of the way our industry worked. But now, with buyer agents being able to cut their own deal with buyers, and by the way, that's all I do, right? I haven't listed a property in a really long time. I only represent buyers because it's my side gig. I love it. I love having families find that wonderful home. And now I get to dictate my value proposition. I get to dictate my own fee. It's not set by some listing agent and some seller thinking what I bring to the table is value, but I get to set it with my own client, which creates way more opportunity for me, where I think I will actually make more money than I did coming out of that hot sellers market we were just in. And people are just throwing me pennies because they control the listing.
I agree. I mean, I feel like agents no longer have to work for free,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
It's like, you now have control over your compensation before you ever show a property. And I think, to your point too, Ed, like having it mandatory, across the board, I think is also important and required. I was actually going to be doing a video post about this, had the settlement not occurred, or at least the proposed settlement. I know we keep talking about it as if it's finalized. It's not finalized, everyone. It's proposed. It still needs to be approved, but it's probably not going to be less than what we're currently dealing with at a minimum. But, it was something I was advocating for, is that, as a former broker owner for almost a decade, I'd been teaching our agents at our brokerage to use buyer brokerage agreements to get hired, because it's also professional, right? I mean, it's about being professional. We are in one of the, if not the largest industry in the world, which is real estate. It's the creator of more millionaires, billionaires, wealth, et cetera, than any other, industry out there. And so I think portraying professionalism is probably our biggest, weakness and asset, you know? And so I think it's super important to do that. Lance, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. And, I was an agent myself a long time ago. And, being a buyer's agent, you feel like you're working for free until you find that person the perfect property. But now being able to get that buyer's broker agreement signed, being able to dictate your commission, being able to show your value, and setting yourself apart from the other agents in the marketplace, it's going to be a competitive edge. And especially with if you're doing lead generation, I was a heavy lead generation person before realty.com, and doing lead generation, you get these people up in the top of the funnel, you get them to meet first, and you're just like, convey your value, you convey your professionalism, you treat your buyers clients like you treat your listing clients, you're going to win. You're going to show them that value, and everything you're going to show with that value, it's going to make it so you are that top agent. So back in the day when you go on listing presentation, you knew what you were doing, Kendall. You knew that your goal is get the agreement signed, show your value, you know, connect with the customer, do all that great stuff. Going on a buyer's appointment, you're just like, show them the house, we get paid. Now, the whole script is flipping where we're meeting with a buyer. It's just like meeting with a listing presentation, because you're building that relationship with the customer. You're showing them their value. You're making that connection. And even before this, like back, one of the best advice I used to give to a buyer's agent is take them out to lunch, go to a meal with them. Buying somebody a meal goes 100 times further than almost anything you can do these days, because they'll remember, like, wow, he took me to a cool meal. We had a drink, we had fun, we did stuff. Like, that was always my advice. And now I say that even more. Take the agent, take the client out and show them your value. and do it in a relaxing setting. Don't just walk in and be like, here's a piece of paper, sign it. No, build a
Yeah.
relationship with them first and make sure that it's a good fit in the relationship for both of you and the buyer.
Yeah, that's so true, Lance. Because here's the other thing, right? And you know this, Kendall, right? As we represent buyers as agents, the easiest thing we do, or the thing that has the least amount of value, is telling a potential buyer what houses are for sale.
Right.
That's not what I bring to the table. What I bring is what, Lance, you just talked about, that relationship, right? I want to talk with you for half hour, 45 minutes, and I want to know, why are you moving here now? Where are you in that cycle of life, and what kind of home do you need? And here's the reality, and Kendall, you know this, right? And Lance, right? We've all been there with buyers. There's what they tell you they want. There's the
Right.
houses they say that would be perfect for them. Then you walk into those houses, you see the stress. Oh, maybe this is a bigger project than I was expecting, or it's a little big. You're right. And then you're like, nope, this is not what you really need. Now, after seeing 2, 3 houses with you, now I can match you to the property that makes sense, that you'll be comfortable in. So I want that hour long conversation over a meal about them, their family, what they're doing, what their kids or parents moving back in with. I need to know that about them to provide the best level of service that I can, because it's about matching them to the right house, not just giving them some list of, hey, here's what's for sale today.
Well,
Yeah.
Ed, here, I'm sorry, you want to go? I,
Go
I
ahead,
was gonna
Lance.
say, Ed, like it's the exact thing. It's like the more time you spend with someone, I laughed because I've had this happen so many times that people think they know what they want until they see what they want.
Correct.
So, and when you show them what they want, then it's just like, wow, you just conveyed your value. That like there's 100 ways we can convey our value, but learning what the person wants and showing them that this is a great fit for you, this is where you want to go, this is what you want to do, and learning that the knowledge that you have of a neighborhood, or the knowledge you have of certain homes, or the knowledge you have of how much work needs to be done. Like some people might want a fixer upper, and then they walk in that fixer upper, but then you take them to a new construction, and they're like, I'm signing on the dotted line right now. I want that new home.
Yep.
So
Yeah. And there's a comment there's a question in the comment about, and I want to make sure I understand, what's our take when it comes to issues like, holding a buyer for 6 months, and an agent's perhaps not performing, things like that. And, I think, the thing about agreements is, if you want a good agreement, I know Ed has some comments on this. I'm going to say mine so then he can share his thoughts on buyer agency agreements and how he plans to utilize them. But I will say this: a good buyer agreement is just like a good listing agreement, meaning there are options, right? And some of those options could include an easy exit, right? And allowing a client to terminate the agreement if it's not working, right? Because at the end of the day, how many of us want to work with clients that don't want to work with us? That's not typical, right? Usually none of us want to hold a client to a contract and the relationship is soured. Now, it's different story, if you want an agreement that's enforceable because you feel like somehow the buyer did not hold up their end of the bargain, right? So sometimes you want your agreement to cut both ways, right? Have teeth, protections for the client, but protections for you or the brokerage as well. Those are things that as a brokerage, you'll have to decide. Those are things that as a team, you'll have to decide, because at the end of the day, how we enforce these agreements will be a whole nother TBD. I so one of my examples I use for this whole scenario is the real estate industry is a quilt to me, and someone just pulled on the string. And so the problem is as you pull on a string, what happens? The string just keeps pulling. And at some point you realize like, oh wait, I've got to snip it and tie that off. And then what happens though is that another string will snag. And now we're pulling and pulling, pulling, we got to snip and tie that off. So there's going to be a lot of that, I think, with these changes. There's going to be a lot of consequences, a lot of outcomes that just, are still to be determined.
yeah.
And how we handle them is still also to be determined. But we just need to know that even with all the uncertainties, it'll be okay, and there's tons of opportunity as well. So, Ed, what is your take on, the buyer representation agreement, what it could look like, how you could leverage it and pivot in a more positive way, with utilizing it in your business.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the most relevant questions people are asking right now, because you can start doing some of these aspects before everything becomes finalized. And when I say that as someone who, when I was working in California, where most people didn't do buyer rep agreements, right? I did. And what I used was the non-exclusive. And I was very comfortable with the non-exclusive. First off, the non-exclusive is 1,000 times better than nothing as far as protecting my own rights. Secondly, it was, again, a layer of less commitment in the exclusivity. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, the quality and the consumer friendliness and the ease of understanding for a consumer and a potential buyer what your buyer representation agreement looks like is going to win the day. Because remember, every buyer is going to have to sign one. So what happens when I roll up with my non-exclusive, easy to understand? I start off with the 15 things that I'm going to do for them, rather than talking about just the money and all the things the client has to do and all my protections. Are they going to sign mine over yours? Because now this becomes an element of competition. So, Kendall, you had referenced this, hey, to be determined. Remember, that's what the DOJ and these consumer advocates want. They don't want us all using the exact same way of doing it. They want us to compete to bring quality to that consumer experience. And so this is going to be very different depending on your team, the philosophy, what you do. I'm a big believer in non-exclusive, but broker involvement. The concept here is, if I'm involved in showing you the property, putting an offer together, a deep conversation on value and what you should do as far as an offer and whether this home matches you or not, then I should get paid, and my contract will frame that. Now, I'm not going to get paid because I sent you some list of houses, right? I don't deserve anything for that, right?
Yeah.
Or some super preliminary little conversation. And so that's how I think it's going to happen is, right, those people who say, oh, I'm going to lock someone down for a year and force them to pay me. Yeah, you're going to have a hard time getting that contract signed. So think twice before you go super aggressive on a super broker-centric contract. And I say this also to realtor associations. We're used, as realtor associations and organized real estate, we get together with a bunch of brokers who are highly skilled, with a bunch of good lawyers, and we write an agreement that is completely ironclad for the benefit of the broker. Guys, that dog ain't going to hunt, right? Because you're going to come against someone like me, and I'm going to slap down something that's way more consumer friendly. So as realtor associations, I call on you guys to start thinking to the benefit of the consumer, what the consumer needs in that experience as well.
And when you say non-exclusive for our audience, because remember, you already just said how, like you already said, so many agents aren't familiar with the agreements at all. Tell them about the difference. Like, what do you mean by non-exclusive? I think I know what you mean, but I want to make sure the audience does.
So the concept with exclusive and non-exclusive is, can you work with somebody else at the same time? So a non-exclusive means my relationship. So Kendall, if I show you and you sign a non-exclusive agreement with me, we're going to go out. And what that agreement says is, if I show you these 3 or 4 properties, that has my broker involvement in helping you with these 3 or 4 properties. If you decide anytime in the next, 4 months that you're going to buy one of those properties, then you're going to owe me my fee on that. But at the same time, if you call Lance and you enter into another agreement with Lance, maybe for a different part of town where he specializes, right? And Lance introduces you to 3 or 4 different properties, and you close on one of those instead, you need to pay Lance, not me. Yep. Where an exclusive is the opposite. An exclusive says it's much more like a listing agreement, right? A listing agreements are traditionally exclusive, which means if the property sold, I get paid. No matter who found the buyer, no matter how that buyer came about coming into buying that property, I get paid as an exclusive listing agent, right? So that's the other format, where in an exclusive, Kendall, then you would not have the opportunity to go the next Saturday and go tour properties with Lance, because you're committed, to the contract with me. So that's the difference between exclusive and non-exclusive.
Ed, do you believe that basically this is going to be allowed, the non-exclusive ones throughout the United States?
Well, allowed, they're there now. So yes, absolutely.
I know they're there now. Do you believe that these non-exclusive ones could raise issues? Do you believe that certain MLSs might not like it, or do you believe that non-exclusive would be a great way for training?
The non-exclusive, first off, the MLSs are not going to regulate at any level what your
Thank you.
buyer rep agreement is. So that's a
Agreed.
non-issue.
It
Exactly.
has nothing to do with your MLS.
Nothing to do with the MLS at
MLS.
all. If
Yeah.
anything, you're going to have a harder time. If there's ever going to be regulation or rules against agreements, they would be against exclusive, right? If the agencies come out and start signing people up for like 2 years and locking them down in these terms that are not consumer friendly, the government's going to come in and knock that down right off the bat. So I think starting off with non-exclusive, especially if you're in one of these environments where buyers are not used to signing absolutely anything at all, is a nice transition. And then maybe when that relationship deepens, we've gone out a couple of Saturdays, that we have that bond, right? Or we're going to actually write an offer on a particular home. Do we convert that to exclusive? You can. I can tell you, I never did that. I had enough legal coverage in my non-exclusive agreement that if I was involved in the transaction, I felt confident that my buyer was not going anywhere and would use me for that transaction.
Yeah, it feels like here go, Kendall.
Sorry, I do want to clarify a couple of things for the audience. Number one, you've heard me say already, buyer rep agreements, buyer brokerage agreements. The reason those are not necessarily the same thing, because when it comes to agency in the country, like for example, dual agency is illegal in 8 out of the 50 states. So, the language that we use is intentional because it depends on what state you're in and what your state and local rules are, right? So please understand that a lot of the stuff that Ed and I are talking about and Lance are talking about are big picture. We're also coming from the frame of reference from the states we're licensed in, how things are done in those states. So for some of you guys commenting on what's happening in your specific state or your area, we're not disputing that. It's just we're talking, high level and as intimately as we can about what we know. And I will say this also about these agreements. I anticipate, and I know for a fact, one of the things that's going to come out of this is those agreements are all probably going to need to be rewritten, right? This is one of the next steps. As that buyer brokerage agreements as they currently exist are going to have to be rewritten. Listing agreements as they currently exist are going to have to be rewritten. And it'll be interesting to see at a brokerage level if brokers are going to pay attorneys to write their own agreements, have more than one type of agreement. Because remember, contracts are fluid. You don't have to have just one. They can have layers and versions. Or if our state boards are going to partner with our attorney boards for each state and write, attorney framed documents that, will be utilized. Like that's what we do in Florida. We have Florida Realtors partners with the Florida Bar to write documents, write contracts and things like that, and provide spaces for us to fill them in as realtors. I know every state is different, right? So I preface all of that with those comments. But I do think that buyer agreements is going to provide some interesting opportunities and marketing opportunities and for agents, especially for early adopters who quickly learn not only how to present them, but how to get them signed, and then, how to then execute on the expectations set in those agreements for the clients. If you can do those 3 things, you will be so far ahead of the curve and the game, you will not have a problem making money in real estate.
And Ken, if I could say one little nuance that's part of the settlement agreement, right? That's going to be a requirement. So you're right. These are all going to have to be rewritten because the vast majority that I have seen, especially those created by like realtor associations, because it operates in the current system with unilateral offers of compensation from an MLS, most of them have this kind of a phrase. If there's any differential or overage between what is agreed in the buyer representation agreement and what is offered in the multiple listing service or comes from any third party, the differential goes to the broker. Yep. Not going to happen, right? The settlement agreement specifically says in your representation agreements, it's going to have to say in there that if there's any differential or overage that comes from any third party, that will not go into the hands of the buyer's agent, right? That needs to that overage belongs to the consumer, either the buyer or the seller, but it ain't going to the broker.
So basically, people understand what you put into your buyer agreement is the cap on what you can make, is what he's
Right.
saying. Like that's just the plain language of it is the cap. So you can't make more than what you told the buyer you were willing to charge them. So if you go in low with the buyer and expect that, oh, well, the seller decided to pay me more, you cannot do that. So you are capped at whatever you put into your buyer agency agreement or your buyer broker agreement or buyer rep agreement.
And that,
Lance, did you have something?
yeah, that's actually a great thing. For one of the things I was going to say is that, Ed, you brought up a really good point. Realty, we're going to be doing a lot of private coaching, a lot of training of the customer base. And one of the things we're going to say is going into this non-exclusive relationship, it's a great stepping stone. It's a great way to get comfortable. It's a great way to say that here we are, we're not exclusive. This is just the paperwork we got to do, just opening the door. And then also saying that, I'm only going to, charge X amount, but I'm going to fight to get as much possible from that seller on your behalf. And everything I fight for that I get more than what I'm charging you, that all goes to bring down your closing costs, to bring down your purchase price. And that's one of the things that you can convey as value now, basically, and say that I'm going to do everything I possibly can to make it so at the end of the day, I paid for myself and I got you money off. And that's going to be my job as an agent and as your agent representing you.
So I want to add to that. Everyone talks about an proposition, and I really want to go a little deeper on that because I feel like that has become a buzzword that we use now, or buzz phrase, and we need to bring clarity, especially to a lot of people who are not used to having these types of conversations with customers. So, like, what does that really mean? I'm going to tell you what it means to me, and then I'm happy to let Lance and Ed chime in. But for me, it's about the client experience. That's what I'm selling. My client experience includes my enhanced technology, my knowledge and expertise, my negotiation skills. It includes my knowledge, my intimate knowledge of the real estate contracts, how I know them better. In fact, I can tell you what paragraph says what in that contract, for example. It includes all the resources and partners that I have at my disposal that I've already worked with, and I can refer to you with confidence that they're going to assist you the way that in the manner in which you require to be assisted, and are going to be honest and transparent with you. That's another thing, my communication and transparency. That's experience you're going to get working with me. And I think it's just really important that agents start to make a list of those types of things. What is the technology that you use? What is your communication style? Are you a texter, emailer, caller? Are you willing to work on their what they want versus what you want? Do you do updates every Monday on what's happening? Do you send listings every day immediately, or or do you do a summary? Again, whatever it is that you plan to do with your customer. Oh, also, when you go to showings, do you show up with the property disclosures, an MLS sheet, like all the things that they need to know about the property taxes? Are you showing up for them in a particular way that's unique or better than your competition? Detail that out, write it out, and put it in your agreement. Let them know in writing, this is what I'm going to do for you. That is, to me, communicating your value proposition. That is like having a value proposition, is thinking about all those things, detailing them, and then putting them in writing, committing to execute on them at the highest level. Lance, Ed, if you have anything to add to that.
I totally agree with you. I'm the same way. Like, as I thought about rewriting my own agreements, right, instead of using the forms that I'm so used to using, that's exactly the same thing I did. That's why I'm specifically keep saying that list of 15. That's my list of 15 things that I'm doing for you that shows up on the front page of the agreement, right? And I'm comfortable committing to those duties, right? And I think it's incumbent upon you as the buyer's representative to have that conversation. And again, that's personalized. That's your style. That's what you bring to the table. And that's what makes our industry so fun and so great, right? I'm a really good buyer's agent, but not for everybody. There have been some agents on, this is the other advantage of my non-exclusive. I've had scenarios where after showing properties for a couple Saturdays, I took the call from someone with a little bit of that nervousness going, hey, Ed, we like what's going on, but we just don't feel and I cut them off and go, hey, no problem. The agreement you signed lets you go to somebody else. I think that's a better thing for you.
Yep.
Right. And that's okay. Right. I'm not a good agent for everybody. And recognizing that and making that part of your value proposition, I think is really important.
So, one of the questions in the chat is that I thought was a really good one to bring up: adjustments for builders and bonuses. How do we? Is this one of those things strings we're going to have to like tie off later? And thinking about, how did the settlement contemplate those opportunities where you get those incentives, that may not be contemplated in a typical buyer rep agreement?
So that's a good question. And again, this is one of those things where, Wayne Gretzky said the reason he was a great hockey player is he skated to where the puck was going. He didn't pay attention to where it was.
Mhm.
This is one of those elements, right? This exists today in this format because that's the way it works today. So it's on some of these strings we're pulling that's a great analogy you make. Realize that string's going to go away, right? If you're going to work with a client and that client is going to be looking at some $8 million condo in Miami, right?
Mhm.
Where this is a very typical kind of thing, and it's a very high net worth client, right? Build that knowledge into your fee structure if that's something that is valuable to the buyer to do that. But this is exactly what the DOJ, the consumer advocates, don't want, is that you tell the buyer, oh, don't worry, I'm for free. And then you just go and only show them the high end stuff where you're getting the most money, right? That's the exact practice that they're trying to stop from happening, right? So there is going to have to be some adjustment on that, and again, if you work in that world and that is, you can justify that value that you bring. Because, hey, man, I understand some of those people, if you're getting on an airplane and flying to another country to have conversations, dude, you better be making a lot more than me showing someone their first home here in Knoxville, Tennessee, right? That percentage better be a lot more. And that's fine. So again, there's no cap on the percentage that you negotiate. The key, though, is your buyer needs to be the one who decides that, not the guy providing the incentive on the side.
Yeah. So, I mean, one potential way to do that is go higher on your fee in the buyer rep agreement and offer to come down.
Correct. Right.
Right?
And that's fine. The marketplace will provide the cap.
Yeah.
Right.
I see a question in the audience speaking about those buyers are educated and they don't want to pay 200,000 commissions. They would go to the seller. That's not completely true. I'm myself and Ed, we're both commercial realtors also, and as a commercial realtor myself, I've got millions of square feet of commercial office space, and I sold a building last year. I was all about finding a great buyer's agent. I was all about finding a commission, because I believe that a buyer's agent will bring value. Even though if I list a building for $15 million and it's a great building, it's 80% full, it's doing really well, I don't know the buyers that are going to go out and buy a $15 million building. I want those buyer's agents to bring me a quality person that's going to purchase the building, that has knowledge of the area, that's looking to do it. I don't mind paying, a $300,000-$400,000 commission. So some of the smart sellers will know that they're going to get maximum value out of cooperating with buyer's agents, even in this new economy.
I
Yeah.
think that kind of leads us into the next
Well,
change.
before we get there, I do have something I want to say about this specifically, because I think that's a good point. One of the things I think we as agents have to remember, first of all, it starts with our mindset. It's a messaging challenge that we're in now, and that you've got to get your messaging on point. And this is your messaging. And I'll tell you what I think your messaging is to a seller and to a buyer, right? And then that will lead us into the next point, and that Ed can go over that. But let me say this, the messaging to a buyer is this. And the fact that you have to remember, it is not a good customer experience for an agent or for a customer to have to call 13 agents to see 13 properties. That's just not practical. In fact, studies have shown people will pay more for convenience. Calling 13 realtors and waiting hours or days or not hearing anything at all from a realtor to show a property is not a good experience.
Yep.
So you will find there might be a few that might try that, but they will probably quickly discover that that's not a path to greatness or success, right? There's a lot of challenges with that. So, what you will be doing as a listing agent is, and again, that's one of the reasons why you'll have these conversations with your buyers. And so, let me start with the buyer conversation. To the buyer, you're going to say to a buyer, this is my, agreement. I'm looking forward to you hiring me so that I can get to work for you and helping you find the home of your dreams, or however you want to phrase that. Now, there will come a time, and I commit to do this for you, buyer, is I'm going to call on every listing and confirm whether that seller is offering, or that seller or that agent is offering compensation or not. I'm going to find out for you. And then I'm going to let you know if they're offering compensation or not. And what that means for you buyers, you're going to have to make a decision on if on that particular property, if you are willing to pay me to get you through that transaction or not. And if not, whether you want to see that home or not. So we don't get to decide, and we shouldn't be deciding whether to show homes or not to clients, but we need to make it clear to them and be transparent to them that, hey, on this property, this is one of the properties where you may be required to pay me if we're successful, if I'm not able to successfully negotiate a commission paid by a third party. So, I think we need to have those types of conversations. And, on the listing side, we're going to have to decide as listing agents if we want to work with sellers or not, who are not willing to offer an incentive to the buyer. Because remember, paying a buyer's agent is as much an incentive to the buyer as it is to the buyer's agent. Not only that, it's a protection to the buyer. You have to think about how we came to this place in the first place 30 years ago. It was about the consumer protection agencies were advocating for representation to protect buyers. And so that is part of our job. Buyers previously were buying homes that had sinkholes, and unknowingly they were buying homes without all the knowledge and the details and access to the information that they needed. That's one of the reasons why they hired us. So you're going to have to decide, as a buyer's agent and a listing agent, if you're going to be willing to work with clients who expect you to work for free. That'll be your choice. Or
So
you can negotiate a specific rate for that particular client. Because that's the other thing. Remember this, you can charge different rates to different clients with different experiences, or for different experiences. You don't have to have a fixed rate. That's the whole point of all of this, right?
yeah.
So get flexible, guys. We have to bend so we don't break.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, good, Lance.
Yeah, Kendall, I've been doing this for a while as a listing agent. I still take listings around the country. Realty.com, we're a brokerage in all 50 states. I don't know how many people know that. And basically, we just took a listing last week, and when I was speaking to the owner of the property, I said, let's do 3.5% for the buy side. I'm not really too concerned about the sell side, and let's bring in some good buyer's agents. And we did a listing in San Antonio last year where we did 4% on the buy side, because I basically say that I've always said that the buyer's agent's gonna bring a qualified buyer. We need to reward them. We need to show that we believe in them. So from the day that I founded my company to even still today, I'm a serious believer in the buyer's agent. Like we had, a couple $1 million listing in San Antonio last year at 4%. People told me we were crazy. Like, what's wrong with the house? I said, nothing wrong with the house. I just don't want to find a buyer. So that's really what it was.
One of the things too that this settlement does is helps us at the MLS level. So what the other aspect of what's going to happen here is that the MLSs have to remove from their systems all rules and all fields that are related to this unilateral offer of compensation. And what that means is, the way the system works now is, as a buyer's agent, if you bring a buyer that closes per the MLS rules, you are contractually entitled to the amount of money that the listing agent had put into that box. And if you don't get that money, you can file for an arbitration through the association, and there's a whole way for you to get your money, because the contract for you to get paid as the buyer's agent is the MLS rules. So what this settlement says now is all those rules are going away. So there will be none of those protections or opportunity for you to get that money. But, and this is a major but under these rules, we as an MLS can still provide a place for the listing agent to communicate any seller concessions. Okay, and this is an interesting stat. I went back in 2023 and looked at all of the CRMLS closings, like pulled the number of closings, and we have a required field when you close out a listing where you have to tell CRMLS if there were any seller concessions. Now, this has nothing to do with compensation in the current system, right? Because we still have compensation in the MLS and it's all running the way it's always have. This is things like escrow fees, title fees. We saw lots of loan buy downs, repair costs. 50% of the closed listings in 2023 had some kind of concession from the seller to the buyer. Right? Now what's going to happen is an additional concession that can be given to the buyer from the seller can be a willingness of the seller to pay some portion or all of a buyer agent's fee. But here's the distinction. Here's the difference between the current system, where as a buyer's agent, you just get the money that's specified in the MLS. In the new system, you're going to have to include that ask in the offer between the buyer and the seller. And this is exactly what the plaintiff attorneys, the DOJ, the consumers advocates want. They want the buyer and the seller to negotiate the terms of the deal. So if the seller's going to agree to some kind of payment of the buyer's fee, then that should be reflected in some modification, perhaps, of the list price. Right? So they want these terms of the contract to offset one another. And by the way, this is not unique. This is not, oh my God, how is this going to work? Just like Lance said, this is how every commercial transaction works. There's no MLS in the commercial world. There's no offer of compensation. But guess what? I've done over 200 closings as a buyer's agent. I got paid on every one of them. And on most all of them, I got paid entirely by the seller. Okay, so this is not new. We're not creating some fanciful new way of how this works. We're simply going to be giving the parties an opportunity to negotiate the process way. And so that's the kind of, Brian, I'm assuming kind of, which was your third element of kind of what was changing, and a little bit of that process in the rules. And that's kind of what's going to happen. So the good news is there's still going to be this ability for the seller to communicate an incentive to the buyer, through the MLS itself, even though it's not a formalized offer of compensation.
Yeah. Just also remember, guys, though, that the concession can't be required to be only paid to the buyer's agent as a commission. If they're going to offer some sort of concession, it's whether that buyer has an agent or not, right? It can't be mandated to be only for that. Now, the other thing too that I think is really great about the rule change is that in some ways, this actually opens up more way. So previously, we were only, as buyer's agents, only paid one way typically, and that was from the listing broker, right? Now we are able to be paid by 3 different parties. We can be paid directly by the seller, we can be directly paid by a listing broker still, and we can still be paid by, and we can also still be paid by a buyer. So to me, this opens up even more negotiation opportunities for us. Now, there's some couple questions in the comments I think are really important to just quickly address because I think they're easy. One of them was, will the listing agent start asking us what our buyer agreements say? My vote is I think they will. Ed, did you have an opinion on that?
So it's interesting you say that, because you talked about the rule and this limitation that if there is a concession being expressed in the MLS, it can't be conditioned on it being for the buyer broker. MLSs are going to control a little bit of how this is going to happen. I'm advocating for a process that would look something like this. The box for seller, it's called concession and list price, right? It's on the list side. You put it in as part of your listing input. It's just one number, period, right? And it's all concessions that the seller will contemplate or consider in the list price. Why should I, as the listing agent, tell you, Kendall, the buyer's agent, what your buyer needs? Maybe you're working with a buyer that came from another state and has 50% down and can pay you directly and would rather use those concessions for other things like escrow, title fees, loan points,
Yep.
right? Maybe you have a buyer that's barely scraping through and needs all of that to help pay your fee. I don't know that as a listing agent. So why should I say this percentage is for the buyer agent, this percentage is for escrow fees, this amount is for title, this one's for repairs? It doesn't matter. If my seller says, hey, 10% is a number of concessions I'm willing to pay, then have at it. Let you decide what to do that as the buyer. Don't let the buyer's agent do the buyer's agent job. It's not the listing agent. So I think the way that gets presented through the MLS, and I think what you're going to see is a single flat number that incorporates anything, and then you arrange that as the buyer in the document itself. Now, that being said, I do agree with you that if you ask that my buyer fee is X, should the seller and listing agent be able to confirm what those fees are and things? Sure, of course, just like you would confirm and do due diligence on all the other aspects of a real estate transaction, right? To make sure someone's not lying to you and trying to drum up a situation that's not, honest or true. So I have no problem with that, but I think it could become a lot simpler if we look at the fact that the concession amount that you talk as a listing broker about to your own seller is more broad, right? And is meant to attract as many buyers as we can. And I think we also need to have a little checkbox that says, I'm advertising no concession, but seller will entertain anything you want, put it in.
Yeah.
Right. And then the buyer can just put in whatever their situation is. And the seller should be able to communicate this willingness to negotiate. Right.
Well, Ed, the smartest agents and the best buyer's agents are going to be the ones that really win here. You're going to have the buyer's agents that understand everything you just said and be like, I'm going to get my fee. I'm going to work best for my client. I'm going to work that seller, and I'm going to make it so, he believes X, Y, and Z. But yet it's going to be the best for my buyer. Like, the smartest buyer agents are going to become the most dominant agents in the country. And we know the smartest listing agents in every market. In every market, you usually know your local listing agent. Like, where my dad has a home, where I have a home, where I have investment homes. I know if I'm going to list my house, I'm probably going to call that agent that blankets the neighborhood. And soon those buyer agents are going to be just as powerful.
Well, and I imagine agents are going to communicate commission offerings via email, right? It doesn't mean that you don't get to communicate it. You just can't communicate it through the commission field in the MLS any longer. And it looks like, the concessions is maybe the only place we'll be able to communicate that on the MLS. But I do have two questions I want to ask you, Ed, and I'm going to put them both together and let you kind of split time with them however you want. Number one, how do you think this is going to impact procuring cause?
Okay.
That's one. And number two, what do you see as the role of retainers? What do you think that role is going to be? Do you think that we're going to see an increase in retainers? So retainers and procuring costs.
Okay.
I want
Great.
your thoughts on that.
So I got my start in organized real estate in pro standards. I've been an ombudsman. I sit on the pro standards panel for the state of Tennessee. I think you're going to see almost a complete elimination in all procuring cause cases, right? Because the whole concept of procuring cause is kind of an interesting idea, right? We're going to sit together and we're going to have 3 realtors tell me who helped the buyer. I got an idea. Why don't we go ask the buyer who their agent is, right? And so in this new world, what's going to happen is I don't think you're going to have these conflicts about procuring cause, because there's going to be a buyer representation agreement that dictates the relationship between the buyer and the buyer's agent, right? So could you still theoretically have some? Maybe, but I think they will be far and few between.
Yeah.
I think retainer agreements will depend on your state. I can tell you in California, they're not going to happen whatsoever, because you're probably violating state law. Because if you remember back in the REO days when I was an REO broker and it was an intensive buyer's market, remember all those advocates that you could pay to help you save your home and do all those things. Guess what kind of laws got put into place to protect the consumer from those creative real estate agents? There's a lot of states that have anti-advanced fee rules that arose from those short sale, distressed property type of days, right? Those laws are still in the books, right? The government never gets rid of a law because it's not relevant anymore. And so I also, so while I hear this idea that your realtor will be like the lawyer and you'll pay some kind of retainer fee, this or that, on two levels, I don't see that happening, because here's the other thing that starts happening if you charge a fee up front. Say goodbye to your 1099 status and say hello to a W-2, and your brokerage firm paying your Social Security, workers' comp, and all of the other things that go along with you being a full W-2 employee, because that's what you just converted yourself into, right? The IRS rules as to why we as agents get to be 1099 employees, 1099 independent contractors instead of W-2 employees, has to do with you getting paid on the conclusion of a thing. So I hear that out there as a thing, but the reality is I don't see that coming to fruition because of those two issues, right? State laws forbidding it. And I'm pretty sure most of you are entrepreneurial enough that you enjoyed the 1099 life and don't want to become a W-2 employee.
Facts and fair. Definitely. I love that. Great commentary there, Ed. And Denise, you put a comment in the chat that I wanted to address, and that was, a concern that you had that you're going to see agents working for a particular percentage or be a low fee or low cost flat fee broker. I do want to address that real quick, because number one, we've always had that. Since the dawn of time, since agents could charge fees, there's always been a broker, brokerages, agents, whatever, who did gimmicks, who did, low cost, low fee, low percentage offerings. And that's, to me, I don't think we should be concerned about that. I think that's not a concern at all. Number one. Number two, that's okay. That's exactly what they want to happen with the industry. But number three, most of the time, because the reality is, you have to do so much real estate and sell so many homes to make a living. And what happens when you charge a low fee? You become a low margin, high volume business. What happens when you become a high volume business? Well, especially one that's service oriented, that takes a lot of time. Guess what? You cap out on what you can do, meaning it's also probably going to be low service, right? Low fee, you often get what you pay for. So that's one way that you can differentiate yourself from a cost perspective and say, hey, listen, I take on fewer clients at a time. I deliver a higher level of service and a higher level of experience. And that's why I charge more. So do not be afraid of agents who charge varying fees. That's the whole point of all of this, is to create that diversity and create that competition. But you also creates that competition where you get to charge more because you're willing to do more. And like I said, sales statistics have proven people will pay more for the perception of value. Why do people pay $5,000 for a Louis Vuitton bag when they can buy a beautiful Coach bag for $300, right? Because it has a perceived value, right? It doesn't even have to be actual value, to be perfectly honest.
That's a great comment, Kendall. And realize there's no such thing as a typical buyer, right? I use this example. My wife, Cinnamon, she knows more about real estate than I do, right? She's the daughter of an appraiser. That's what she did when we met. She has no license. She's not a realtor, never has been, but we've bought and sold lots of homes, investments. She knows real estate, the market, she can value a property better than I can. Okay.
Right.
If something happens to me and she decides to go out and get a different house, does she need the skill set of Kendall, right? With all the negotiating ability? Trust me, you're not going to win a negotiation against her under any scenario. I promise you that. Right. So does she need to pay that premium and that value? Because Kendall brings a lot to the table, but the reality is Cinnamon doesn't need all of that help. She needs someone to open the door. She needs someone to fill the blanks out on the form the way she's going to tell you to do it. Right. And that's fine. So why shouldn't she be allowed to hire someone who's only going to provide that limited service? That's okay. Right. And by the way, guys, it doesn't hurt any of you any, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead and provide your high value service with what you're doing. The fact that she found someone to do something that for the skills that she needed to pay for is fine. It doesn't impact you.
Yeah.
Well, Ed, even this, there's been rebate realtors around for the last 10 plus years, easily 15, 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
You've been having realtors run around and being like, you get a rebate when you buy from me. You get a rebate when you buy from me. Redfin had the rebate. All these companies have the rebate, and the rebate realtors, they provide a lower value of service, a lot of them. And a lot of them, are discounting it, giving money back and everything they've done. And we didn't have issues with them when they became popular. So I don't think we're going to have issues now as long as the realtors can convey their value. And, I know there's a lot of customers of realty.com in here today. And one of the great things is that we're going to coach, we're going to help you, we're going to work with you. But our leads, a lot of the leads that come in, they're a little bit more up the funnel. And you're going to get that first opportunity to work with these agents and these clients, the agents on realty.com, first opportunity with some of these up the funnel buyers. And you get to have that first presentation, that first communication, and that first impression with a lot of these clients. And then it's a whole new world that we're going into. So the coaching, you can always reach out to anyone on my team and all that good stuff. But it's just like rebate realtors, they never caught on. And I believe that a great realtor is still going to be able to convey their value.
Awesome. Well, I think we've reached the end of our time. Thank you so much, Ed.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Ed.
thank you guys for the opportunity. It
You.
was a lot of fun.
Yes. All right. Well, thank everyone for being on the call. Hopefully we answered some of your questions, gave you some optimistic outlook, gave you an optimistic outlook, had a fun spirited debate. Not really, but because we mostly agreed with each other, but conversation at least about how to move forward in the industry. And we wish you well. We wish you success. And thank you, Lance, for the opportunity to be on this
Yeah.
call with you guys.
Thank you guys both. And anyone who has any questions, needs any help, feel free to reach out to us here at realty.com. And we have a whole team of coaches. We're happy to help answer any questions you have and guide you through this process.
Thank you. Bye.